Ungreening Golden Gate Park. This project looks at Golden Gate Park's legacy of an idealized green landscape and argues that we need to rethink and redesign our parks for today's world. Ungreening Golden Gate Park would acknowledge that urban landscapes are dynamic and must change with values and with ecological realities. Critical conservation, not historic preservation, can help move beyond old ideas of what California should look like. With a more dynamic approach to change over time, the park could be a leader in moving the region forward in a changing global climate. California, famed as a land of sunshine and plenty, is closer to a desert than it is to a Garden of Eden. But enterprising Californians have found water underground, in the mountains, or in nearby states, and have pumped it, dammed it, and piped it into farms and cities. Without added water, California is green in the winter and brown in the summer. Almost all the rain falls between November and March. But people like green lawns year-round, so a lot of the most precious resource of the state, its water, has been pumped, dammed, and piped to garden and lawn sprinklers. California is now in its fifth year of drought. When snowpack is minimal and reservoirs are nearly empty, people pump more groundwater from underground reservoirs called aquifers. The aquifers took millions of years to form, and they replenish slowly. Aquifers are as unrenewable as oil. The further the underground level falls, the deeper wells have to be dug, and the more money and energy it takes to pump the water to the surface. And when water is pumped out of the ground compacts. Parts of central California are sinking at a rate of about a foot per year, causing roads and bridges to crack, causing billions of dollars of damage. And when too much fresh water is pumped out of the ground near the coast, saltwater intrusion occurs as ocean water takes the place of fresh water that used to hold it out. 100 miles south of San Francisco, Monterey County's groundwater is salty 7 miles in from the coast. Once salty, wells can never be used again. As temperatures rise and the climate changes, drought is the new normal. Fresh water is becoming scarcer and scarcer, and seawater will increasingly impact the coasts. We need to establish a new relationship with water in California and a new ideal of what a beautiful landscape looks like. Nothing exemplifies the state's troubled relationship with green landscapes like San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. As San Francisco became a city during California's gold rush, it grew on the interior of the peninsula facing the bay. The outside lands on the Pacific side were uninhabitable sand dunes. Early photos show horses struggling through miles-wide sand. Early accounts describe the area as desolate and barren. In the Bible, God uses deserts as a punishment for those who disobey, banishing Adam and Eve or turning a fruitful land into a salt desert for the wickedness of them that dwell therein. Desolate and barren lands are incompatible with ideas of manifest destiny. Settlers tried to make the western desert bloom like a rose. Vast areas of deserts were converted to verdant farms. But the deserts could bloom only through massive irrigation projects. Americans' ideals of beauty were inspired by the meadows, forests, and streams of Great Britain. From its temperate green landscapes in an Atlantic climate, predictable, ready for planting, with year-round precipitation, came the American conception of beauty. Those ideas of beauty were easily copied in the humid climates of the large cities east of the Mississippi. San Francisco was the largest city west of the Mississippi, and it was the only large city that did not get summer precipitation. After New York City's Central Park was built in the 1850s, a flurry of park building in other large cities followed, all in similar styles. Boston's Frederick Law Olmsted built most of them. Ever the realist, Frederick Law Olmsted proposed a climate-appropriate park system for San Francisco on the north side of the city with good soil and more water. This was not what the civic leaders wanted. They wanted their own green Central Park. It was seen as an essential step in becoming an important and respected city. 24-year-old surveyor William Hammond Hall thought he could do better than Olmsted. He closely followed Olmsted's Central Park design, creating a slightly larger park of meadows and forests. Hall used barley grass and lupin to stabilize the sand dunes before adding imported soil and planting trees. Within 5 years, the park's major meadows and forests were established in the former Great Sand Bank. Today, that sand, up to 80 feet deep, is just under the thin surface of soil, plants, and lakes. Water pumped up from the ground leaks back down in an endless cycle of pumping. About 15% of the total park water is lost, leaking out of poorly lined lakes, a loss of both water and the energy needed to pump it back. Looking at historic postcards, brochures, and contemporary websites, the featured plants, animals, and structures are from all over the world. Golden Gate Park tries to offer the best of all these worlds, a limitless collection of the planet's most exciting and exotic scenery. And in Golden Gate Park, the best of the world is available not just in the summer, but all year. This global aesthetic is heavily dependent on added water. Today, the Parks Department adds the equivalent of about 15 inches of rain per year through irrigation, essentially replicating Seattle's annual rainfall. That added water, around 1 million gallons per day, works out to the daily water usage of about 22,000 San Franciscans, or the whole outer Richmond neighborhood. Golden Gate Park's irrigation, historically drawn from the unrenewable aquifer below the city by windmills, then electric pumps, will soon be supplied by a reverse osmosis recycled water treatment plant with a projected cost of $186 million. The water will be such high quality that it could be used as drinking water. But groundwater will still be pumped up from the park's wells. The water will now be added to the city's water supply. Instead of reducing water use, this arrangement will add more new water into San Francisco's total. A huge ethical dilemma emerges. Even if irrigation water can be created, should it be used to perpetuate an unsustainable 19th century landscape aesthetic? Philosophers know that ideals of beauty are subjective and the result of long cultural histories and power dynamics. Taste is learned. Golden Gate Park's early major benefactors and designers were all from someplace else, all from places with humid, wet, green summers. And even though all of today's park commissioners come from California, designers of the park's largest recent projects, the Academy of Sciences and the De Young Museum, continue to hail from humid climates. As the park pursues a global audience, it continues to meet global expectations about what a park should look like. These learned ideals of beauty have been propagated across the California landscape. After Golden Gate Park copied the style of Central Park, other Western parks copied the same meadow forest aesthetic. From large to small scale, year-round green lawns surrounded by trees are the dominant style throughout the region. People have been taught that green parks are the pinnacle of garden beauty. It's hard to argue that people should change the aesthetics of their home gardens and neighborhood parks when the meadow forest aesthetic is still held up as the best you can get if you have the water. Golden Gate Park has missed several opportunities to promote a new aesthetic. When the new Academy of Sciences building was built in 2008, the green roof was planned as a native California hillscape that would go dormant each summer. But when Italian-Swiss architect Renzo Piano saw the mock-up, he had a fit. The dormant native plants were deemed impossible. The global tourist audience would be expecting something beautiful and green on the green roof. So the sprinklers were never turned off. This high-design building, focused on teaching science, would have been the perfect place to start teaching a new ideal of beauty based in that science. But instead, the architects decided to just keep fulfilling what people expected to see, green, year-round. What if, instead of green grass and palm trees, the new Academy of Sciences had used plants that don't need 15 extra inches of water per year? What if they had used cypress and oak and olive trees, dramatic agaves, and grasses allowed to go dormant during the summer and turn back to green with winter rains? What if the fountains were replaced with overflowing succulent beds? The Bay Area has led the world in environmentalism. John Muir founded the Sierra Club in San Francisco in 1892. San Francisco now has citywide composting and plastic bag and bottled water bans. The city tops the US-Canada Green Cities Index. But green is a slippery word in San Francisco. Using green as a shorthand for sustainable is very misleading in a city with the same annual rainfall as Tel Aviv. With Golden Gate Park, San Francisco is both too green and not green enough. San Francisco's days of trying to keep up with the great cities of the East Coast are over. The city is one of the top international tourist destinations in the US, one of the most desirable places to live in the world. San Francisco has an identity all its own, and its parks can and should reflect that. When will San Francisco stop trying to be more like New York City? And how could Golden Gate Park reimagine what a California park could be? Trying to wait out the drought, slowly switch to drought-tolerant plants, and create new water sources to keep things looking unchanged aren't the right answers. Golden Gate Park has a master plan approved in 1998. It calls for preserving the park, essentially as it is, forever. But nothing is static. The trees are growing and will someday die. The residents and city change around the park. And most importantly, the planet is changing dramatically. Could we rethink the whole premise, establishing a new identity for Golden Gate Park as a place not only of beauty and recreation, but of innovation and sustainability? Of a park that reflects San Francisco's values and responds to a changing planet? The most important aspect of Golden Gate Park's identity is as a beautiful, free place of leisure and recreation. That identity is independent of water inputs. How could we ungreen while maintaining the park's essence? We could start with the most trafficked and most popular places in the park, the places where people take the most photos. These high-profile spots draw the most locals and tourists and inspire them to pull out their cameras to capture what they find interesting or beautiful. The beach edge, the Academy of Sciences, the Botanical Gardens, Stowe Lake, and the Japanese Tea Garden are the most photographed places in the park. Concentrating design and resources in hotspots could be a starting place for the new California garden aesthetic. Each of these places conforms to traditional ideas of beauty: contained sand, exotic global architecture and plants, English-style lake and meadow aesthetics. None of them gives us a new idea about what landscape could be in a world with less water. These spots already receive relatively high maintenance and attention. Channel that money into new interpretations of landscape beauty, starting small and gradually working outwards. As the seas rise, the seawall and highway at Ocean Beach become liabilities. Protective dunes are being rediscovered all over the world. No longer seen as barren and terrifying, dunes are now recognized as an important ecological system. Let's remove the outdated wall and highway along the edge of the beach and learn to love sand dunes. Could oak trees replace palms as symbols of California? What about other drought-tolerant and native or naturalized trees like Monterey cypress and eucalyptus, often insulted, but now an important figure in California's ecology? Most of the park's trees are oak, cypress, and eucalyptus, but showy or exotic species continue to be planted in almost every place of honor. Could people still picnic on lawns of creeping thyme or mattress wireweed, among wildflowers, or on sandy grasslands? Is lawn so essential to this activity? Or could families picnic on other surfaces? Could different language and different aesthetics in some of the most visited places have impacts far beyond the park? Golden Gate Park started as a site of experimentation. People doubted that William Hammond Hall could build an Olmsted-style park on sand dunes, but he did it. Maybe, instead of preserving the physical appearance of the park, we could switch to conserving the spirit of landscape experimentation. Golden Gate Park is almost 150 years old. In 2160, on a profoundly different planet, with different ideals of leisure and recreation, will this park still be bright green? We need to move beyond historic preservation to a dynamic model of experimentation. We can't expect parks to stay the same as everything changes around them. As the premier urban park in Northern California, Golden Gate Park sets up expectations that an English garden aesthetic can and should exist in California's arid climate. But we're hitting the limits of our limitless California dream. It's time to acknowledge that we live in a fundamentally dry place, a place with its own unique beauty, with real seasons, and with a potential cosmopolitan palette of beautiful plants that don't need 15 added inches of water per year. By putting the gold back in Golden Gate Park, we can develop a new aesthetic of California beauty and inspire other regional parks to follow suit. As the planet changes, our parks need to change too.
It's not that easy being green, having to spend each day the color of the leaves, when I think it could be nicer being red or yellow or gold or something much more colorful like that. It's not that easy.